Good evening. Today is November 28, 2021, and this is the 74th episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari. Before we begin our show tonight, I do want to take this opportunity to say that I hope that you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving and a Thanksgiving weekend and had a chance to spend it with your loved ones. And we wish our listeners to be able to have many happy days in the future. I also would like to take this opportunity at the same time to wish the members of the global Jewish community a blessed and happy Hanukkah, which started actually this afternoon and will continue through the afternoon on Monday, December 6th. Hanukkah, also known as a Festival of Lights, remembers the rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem and also the rebellion of the Maccabees against the Seleucid Empire. As the Jewish community begins the celebration, which is symbolizing victory of light over darkness, it is our hope that the looming conflict that exists, it seems, between Israel and Iran does not manifest itself into not only a regional war, but a global conflict. My guests today are my dear friend, Jason Morgan, and so also a good friend, Moet Fukada. Jason is joining us from Japan. He is an associate professor at the renowned Ritaku University in Kishiawa, Japan, and also Moet Fukada, who has recently returned from Japan from her trip. She is a Japanese journalist, an author, and also an IT analyst, whose investigation work has exposed the levels of China's infiltration into Japan and also United States using foreign companies to ensure it can affect both our national security, economic viability over the next 2 decades. First of all, I'm going to be able to thank you both for coming here. Mo, I'm very excited that you had an opportunity to come back. Very proud of you for going back to Japan, going through the prosecution case that was laid against you because of the work you had done and been able to get cleared and even being allowed by the Japanese government to return here and still have an opportunity to talk more about what you have been able to expose. And Jason, God bless your work. You're doing yeoman's work for us, especially with the fact that you recently went ahead and interviewed Moet Fukada on the issues and been able to write in Japan Forward about it. But that's it. Both of you welcome. And Jason, you got the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sargis, and it's an honor for me to be here again. The last time I was here, we were talking about China, and I think we're going to be talking about China again today. So I'm seeing a pattern here. I think I might have a problem with China. So I'm thrilled for the opportunity to speak with you all. And I have to say, Sargis, the credit goes to you and to Moy. I was able to interview Moy about maybe a month and a half ago or so here in Japan, and I first learned of her work because of you. I saw her and Jason Ho in the program here, and I got some of Moy's books. I have some of her books here right in front of me on my desk, and I've been reading her books, and she's got several more. And my eyes were my mind was really blown by what she was, the information that she was providing. So I did a little interview with her and didn't know how it would go. We published it at Japan Forward, and it shot to #1, and it stayed there for probably almost 2 weeks. It was the #1 article at Japan Forward. So people are interested in what Moy and Jason Ho are talking about, and it was. I think this is the issue right here. With technology transfer and what really goes on in politics behind the scenes.
Yeah. Most of people doesn't know Japan is transferring technology to China through Taiwan. It's I don't know. It's maybe secret because I was trying to discover it and I exposed those China spy network in Japan. Then I was almost arrested. I was detained for 5 hours in Tokyo prosecutor's office. So if there was more than 600 people gathering for me to protest against the Tokyo prosecutor. That's why I can come out from Tokyo prosecutor's office. No media talking about me. No conservative people talking about me over the social media. My existence is almost disappearing. Government trying to suppress me. Government wants me to be silent because those military technology transferring is Japanese government deeply get involved. That's why they want to hide from U.S. government.
No, I know that when you kind of look at it from a like let's look at it from the government perspective, right? No government likes to be pointed out that what you're doing might be heading in the wrong direction, and I think this kind of a relationship, as we talked about, started going back to where I initially had put together that article on the possible origination of COVID. I know we went through a lot of iterations on it, Jason, and part of it was because of the security issue. We didn't know how it was going to be affecting. U.S. government didn't want to even publish that. So I ended up actually going to you guys to Japan Forward to publish it. And we published it just before Japan went into a lockdown. So even the U.S. government here was really pushing back on it. And then fast forward to meeting with Moy and Jason Ho, of course, and having those two shows before, showing where the possible networks lie and linking those networks to using open source. The fact that the governments will push back, but I would tell them all the fact that you went back, you didn't have to, but you went back and you actually went through a prosecution process. And the fact that they have a logic to come here, they might not be willing to, as they say, support your points as much, because there's a lot of cleanup that they have to do internally, especially within their bureaucracies. But it speaks volumes of them allowing you to go through that process, getting cleared, and coming back here and having an opportunity to go back again. So in itself, I think that's a indirect way of them saying that, what, you've done a yeoman's job for supporting Japan. But that's my perspective. And Jason, Japan better than anybody else from a U.S. side of the house. How do you think this is going to resolve itself?
Well, I think what Moy brought up at the beginning is the key. So you've got, in Japan, you've got a political system that's basically under the umbrella of the United States. And for the entire post-war, Japan has been under what's called the Yoshida Doctrine. They've been dependent militarily on the United States for protection or collective security. And I think a lot of Americans think that means that the Japanese government is an American ally, but that's really not the case. That's what Moy has been exposing. But at the same time, so you've got two layers. You've got, at the top, you've got sort of the Japanese government and the media complex who are pretending to be conservative or pro-American. But then you've got the majority of Japanese people who actually are quite friendly towards the United States. And so you've got these two layers of conservatives in Japan, and you've got the same thing in the US. You've got people at the top who pretend to be conservative politicians, like the Bushes, for example. But then you've got people on the ground who are running a small business or something, and they're probably friendly towards Japan, and they want to protect Taiwan, and they don't like communist regimes or dictatorships like in the CCP. So you've got kind of multiple layers of so-called conservatives in both countries. But what Moe did was she showed that there's a double game going on here, and not just in Japan, but also in Taiwan. And that is what is, I think, really causing big problems for the Japanese government here. And the fact that so many hundreds of people came out to support her because she was being prosecuted by the Japanese government, I think that shows you that there's two layers here. You've got the government that wants to protect its own interests, and a lot of that has to do with money and technology and power. And then you've got regular people running a business, and they see someone like Moy who's telling the truth getting prosecuted, and they get angry. It's kind of like what, in the United States, we have cases like this too, where the government prosecutes people for their own interests. So the thing with Taiwan is what I really think is causing a lot of trouble here. And Moy can speak a lot more about this technology transfer and the politicians' involvement with Taiwan and the networks.
Yeah, what I pointed out is Panasonic Semiconductor. Panasonic has military technology. It's a dual technology related to a semiconductor. It's gallium nitride technology. Panasonic Semiconductor has a gallium nitride technology. It's a dual-use technology prohibited under export control. And that technology transferred to China CCP through Taiwanese company. That's a, you know, that company always helping PLA, China Army. So that's why I realized 2 years ago, I realized that Panasonic trying to transfer military dual-use technology through Taiwan to China. That's why I met with so many politicians, right-wing politicians, conservative politicians in power. Even I met with Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary and Chief Cabinet Secretary. So no one stopped this transaction. They are happy to transfer military dual-use technology to China, helping China to build a weapon arms system. That's why they are very successful in the hypersonic missiles, and they can build a better radar system than US. On the other hand, Japan and the US doesn't have enough radar chip because of Japanese government transferred Panasonic semiconductor technology to China. That's why we are facing a chip shortage problem even in the US military. F-15 jet fighters, F-13, 35 jet fighters, they don't have enough radar chip. So that's what I'm more worried about the most. I don't want to help China to be stronger. I don't want the China army to be stronger. If Japanese government keeps transferring dual use technology to China army becoming stronger and stronger, and that weapon is aiming to US. And Japan and US should be a ally. We should support the US, but what Japanese government do is totally opposite. That's why Japanese government doesn't want me to talk. They want to arrest me. They want to detain me. They want me to be silent.
Well, look, I mean, Japan is having its own issues. I know even going back to 2014, Bank of Japan purchased a lot of our debt, U.S. debt, in 2014, in October of that year. So even for us, just to be able to have at that time raise our ability to maybe our interest to help our economy would have really sunk Bank of Japan. And I know going back to even 2012, we knew that Japan was being squeezed by China economically. The issue sometimes you run into is, I always have said, okay, if you're going to transfer this type of technology, and this is going to allow you a way to control the entire military capability that China has because you build it for them. That's one thing. But we realize, looking at the chip technology, that's really not under our control. Where we think we are controlling it to Taiwan is actually a backdoor to China, which means that's not happening. So if that is not happening, then we have problems. The issue we even have here in the United States is companies are trying to make money. Even a lot of the Marlow Park guys, if you talk to them, they would probably tell you is, show me how you're going to make money for China, and we're going to go in and invest and support you. That's the problem you run into. So when you have only companies interested about the bottom dollar that they're going to make, and everybody's trying to rush to make money in China, they're not understanding that in the long run, they're actually hurting themselves. They're hurting, in this case, Japan and the United States. So what you're saying, hey, it's just a reality of what is happening. Now, I don't know how you're going to go through legislative process to try to hold those companies accountable to ensure that they do not just sell technology for a profit, because at the end of the day, a China that is expanding its footprint on the global stage and the way it is more of a negative, and will have to get us to a point where you will see a larger global conflict that will affect the entire, not just the Western regions that we're talking about are South Pacific regions, but we're talking about even in the Middle East and even in South America. All these things manifest themselves or the fights on these resources. Jason, break
Sure.
it down a little bit more as to what is the possibility of what can be done in the Japanese government. And I know that they're restricted by the Constitution. But with the current 100th Prime Minister being elected to Japan under his leadership, is there
Right.
anything that you are seeing politically that could be done to maybe change some of the laws to allow Japan to be able to push back against what China is doing?
So this is something that Moe has talked about in her books and in our interviews too, is that there are some very simple things that could be done. There are some laws that could be passed to prevent spying and the transfer of technology. And there are other things that could be done. There are restrictions that could be put, for example, on the movement of people, or even on just buying and selling land. I mean, you could make it a rule that you have to be a Japanese citizen or have a green card or something, be a permanent resident to buy land. All of those things could be easily done, and I don't think it would take much political wrangling to do it. But there's no will to do it, and the reason there's no will to do it is because, as Moy has said in our interview, politics is about business. It's a way to make money, and you know, last time I was on your show, Sargis, we were talking about the Senkaku Islands, and almost every day for for this entire year, and then most of last year, the Chinese have been sending souped up naval vessels painted as Coast Guard ships around the Senkaku Islands, deep inside of Japanese maritime territory. And the Japanese government is doing basically nothing about that. It's the local fishermen who live around there and local politicians, people who live on those islands who are trying to mount a response. But Tokyo is acting like nothing's happening. And the current prime minister, I don't see that he's very much different from Suga-san, the former prime minister. You know, Japan is being invaded. There is an active invasion against this country which I love and which is also an ally of my home country. And I don't see that anybody in Tokyo is doing anything. So you got people like Moe, and you got people like Ganaha Masako-san, you got people like the fishermen around the Senkakus who are standing up and fighting back. But the government is not working for the interests of the people of Japan, in my opinion. And you can see that too with technology transfer. You know, you could solve this problem pretty easily, but there's no political will to do it because the game is set. You know, as Moy has said, Taiwan is kind of a false front for the PRC, and you got sort of a false shop front set up. And it's a really great deal. You get all this technology transfer from Japan and the US. It looks like it's going to a friendly country, to Taiwan, but the back door is wide open. And the Chinese network, the bamboo network, as Jason Ho calls it, is strolling in and robbing us blind. But I think here, Sargis, one other thing that I wanted to point out is, you know, China has made a conscious effort to take over all of the systems of globalism and flip them and turn them into Chinese systems. So Mo and I were just talking about the SWIFT system, the banking network that China is introducing, a new banking network. They're introducing new digital currencies. They want a new global currency. And the One Belt, One Road, which Mo and I were talking about, that's kind of a new Pan-Asianism. You know, China is even taking over Pan-Asianism, appealing to sort of Japanese pre-war sensibilities about Pan-Asianism and anti-Americanism. All of these things are in the mix, and China has really, when you watch it, you have to be impressed. They've done their homework, and systematically they have flipped every lever of globalism to work to their advantage. And Japan is just one of those levers. And China really skillfully got in with the Japanese politicians and got them to do their work for them. Moe knows a lot more about this than I do, but you can see how China has worked to sort of flip Japan over. So it still looks like it's pro-American, but actually it's working for the other side in many ways, the government level.
Moy, I'm going to ask you, do you think that the route has been damaged so much in Japan that there's no recovery, or do you think that there could still recover, that there's Japanese leadership and politicians that can push back on this issue with the minor changes that we're talking about? Because as I say, even in the US, a lot of our intelligence capabilities across administrations are able to at least sustain the country. I know the PSIA has some wonderful guys and gals in there that are doing their best from the Ministry of Interior also to ensure that Japan still remains a viable, independent nation, as it has shown over the decades and centuries, I would say, in the century coming up. But do you think the route has been damaged too much, or is there a possibility that we might see a turn sometime soon?
It's a difficult question because I talk to so many politicians in Japan, so they don't have any intention to protect Japan. Most
Mm,
of politicians just pretend they're patriot, they love Japan, but it's just pose and just they are pretending it. Actually, they are the people transferring technology and just give out money to foreigners, and they don't protect anything for Japanese. So I, how can I say? And also Japanese intelligence agencies are infiltrated by Chinese through Taiwan. So many agency talking to Taiwanese agency. They got the Chinese information through Taiwanese agency. That's why there are
mm,
so many false information about China, so many lies about Taiwan. We cannot know
mm,
anything true about China because all the information is coming from Taiwan. That's why we Japanese always misunderstand about China and Taiwan. We should have independent information agency. Otherwise, we cannot make a good decisions. That's what I'm concerned about.
mm,
Look, we have those in the United States. We've gone through that. We've had FBI, counterintelligence
right,
leaders that actually have had. We found out girlfriends that are Chinese spies that were working them. We've had
right.
politicians here that in the open source we found out were actually Chinese spies. We had major senators here on major, armed forces
Yep.
committees that we have here. I've had actually Chinese infiltrators, but at the same time, as much as they infiltrate us, I can tell you that we do the same thing to them. I guarantee you, there's high paid official in the Chinese government that is, one of the beloved of the Chinese government that's probably been turned by us or even the Japanese government to work for our benefit. Unfortunately, in this battle back and forth, it doesn't seem like we are able to advance our ability when you have private companies are coming in and just literally selling out. Even your
Right.
defense, companies coming in and just trying to make a buck in support of what China's vision
Right.
is. And at the end of the day, I think the problem you're going to run into is because of the way the Chinese government is established and how it expands across even the Belt and Road Initiative. They
Mm,
initially came in on the Belt and Road Initiative. A lot of the countries there, welcomed them with open arms. Today, the
right.
Chinese do not have a good reputation there. I just came back from Africa. I was there looking at what is happening with Sudan, South Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and I can tell you, nobody there likes the Chinese. So they
Mm,
have not made any friends of themselves there. They haven't made friends of the people in Japan. They haven't made friends of the people even in the United States right now.
mm,
And I don't think they're very clumsy when it comes to what you initially used to know as their culture of, well, your door was open. That's why I ended up coming into your house. If you don't want me to come into your house, well, you can leave your
mm,
door open.
right.
They're becoming almost like the Russians, where when they do a cyber attack or they do something,
Right.
they really use a lot of force. it seems like that's how they're starting to manifest themselves across the globe. And I can tell you, I know they control Hollywood. You can see some of the movies that are coming out of Disney, the one-liners where, the gentleman turns around and tells the hero of the movie, "Oh, you've been in the United States, you must have become weak." We can read between those lines. Even my kids can pick up on that when they're watching these. It's just that they're becoming more clumsy as they move forward. What can we do now? We know what the enemy is. We know what he's trying to do. We understand that a lot of the agencies may have been compromised. What is a solution that we can have to ensure that Japan is independent and that United States can work towards the betterment of its ally in the region? What is a step that we can take to at least counter, maybe reset where China is a decade from what its plans were for Japan in itself?
The most serious issue is censorship is very strong in Japan, so we cannot talk about truth, what is happening in Japan. For example, my name, Moet Fukada, is prohibited by the government over the media. No one talk about me, no one dare to touch about Moet Fukada. And also, Japanese government doesn't prohibited to media to talk about any bad word, any single bad word about Taiwanese company TSMC. TSMC is the Taiwanese biggest semiconductor manufacturing company. That company is causing chip shortage all over the world because their share is 55% of world semiconductor manufacturing. They stopped to ship automobile chips to automobile makers, Japanese maker, and US maker, European maker. That's why they don't have enough chips for cars. But but Japanese government wants to give $5 billion, $4 billion, $5 billion to that company to invite Japan to build a factory, very old technology factory in Japan. We put such a big investment, but return is nothing. We just give out money. We just give out our technology, Sony technology, the most advanced technology from Sony, but we get nothing. Japanese people cannot get anything as return. But we can't say anything about it. I cannot say anything about it because that's a censorship from Japanese government.
Jason, from a U.S. perspective, and I know Molly can speak much better to this question, but I'm going to pose it to you.
Sure.
Do you think it's a cultural issue because you Japanese don't want to say that they might have been losing in this battle against China when it comes to the economic dominance in the region? Is that why they might be pushing more towards this?
That's a good question, Sargis. Actually, Mo and I were just talking about that earlier today. So what I brought up a little bit earlier in the show about Pan-Asianism, as Americans, it's easy for us to forget about World War II, what happened before World War II. The reason, part of the reason that Japan fought World War II was to get rid of European and American colonies in Asia. So Pan-Asianism, long before World War II, Pan-Asianism was one of the dominant modes of political action and thought here in Japan. And when you win a war, it's easy to walk away and say, okay, that's all finished. But when you lose a war, it never really ends. And I think a lot of maybe the latent sort of distrust of America might have to do with things in history that were never really resolved. And also another thing that's not so much cultural as it is historical, but in my opinion, I think the entire post-war system is corrupt. I mean, it's basically, the Yoshida Doctrine was basically selling out Japanese sovereignty in exchange for economic benefits. from the United States. It was a deal. Yoshida cut a deal with his American handlers, and in exchange for not having to spend 1 or 2% of GDP on military budgets, they were able to sink all that back into reconstruction, and then with Ikeda Hayato, with income doubling and that sort of thing. So I think because that system is corrupt, and because you have an entire network of so-called alliance managers inside if someone says they're an alliance manager, you should tear up their business card and go somewhere else. You've got a whole system in Washington of people managing the alliance, which is basically managing a corrupt system that benefits politicians and defense contractors. I think, to answer your question to Moy from earlier, and I'm not trying to advocate revolution, but it would take a serious reawakening of the Japanese people and of the American people to say that this entire system we've built and that we've entrusted our security to is corrupt and it hasn't worked for us. You're going to need a Japanese Steve Bannon or a Japanese Trump, even better, to stand up and break some stuff and tear up some taboos and say, we're going to help the Japanese people. And on the American side, too, we're going to ally with our friends in Japan and not with this corrupt government system. I don't think it's so much cultural, Sargis, as it is unresolved history and things that we've swept under the rug, that we don't want to see that this system is not working for the American people or for the Japanese people anymore. It's just easier to turn a blind eye. So I don't think it's cultural. I think that we're already good friends in Japan and the United States. We're already working together really well. It's just the governments are the problem. Moy, you might want to add something.
No, I think. Go ahead, Mo.
Sorry, issue is money. You know, I'm trying to tell people what really happened to Japan, but conservative media, right-wing media, right-wing people always trying to say I am a liar. Those people receive the money from the government. I saw a transaction. I was writing for a Japanese right-wing magazine, and that company's CEO took me to meet with the chief cabinet secretary, not current one, ex-chief cabinet secretary. And then the CEO of magazine said he needs budget. He wanted budget to how can I say, to promote government idea. They can use their people, their commentators, their writers to spread out whatever government want. I was wondering, I couldn't realize that. I didn't understand what they are discussing about. That's a government secret fund to the media to cover up what the government really done behind the scene. You know, patriot Japanese believe in a right-wing magazine, but those people get the money from the government. Actually, those politicians selling country to China, but those right-wing people saying good word about them, they applaud them. They don't say any single bad word about them. That's why people cannot realize what is really happening, because patriot people likes to read a conservative magazine, but that magazine is full of fake news. That is the most problem caused by the Japanese government.
No, look, and I want to kind of go back to what Jason had talked about as far as the post-World War II relationship built between the two countries. Look, when I was there in 2015 at the anti-terrorism conference in Japan, I did, at that time we were warning, when I was there with even Michael Yon and Al Johnson, we're warning, look, China's very active here. Be very careful. The Japanese, actually, the first article, if you guys go to the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, and take a look at what I had written about Japan. More you get a chance, and you'll see what I wrote there is basically what is happening today, and the same call to action for the Japanese people. And this was in 2015, not in 2021. But I would tell you, I did go to the War Museum and I read through what Japan viewed and why they went to war at that time, of course, against the United States. And you could see it from a logical perspective. You took the emotions out of it, that they did it because of where the nation was and what they had to do to ensure the survival of the nation over a longer period of time. The old systems that had fallen apart after World War One still had effects in the Asian region. So I could understand why they did it. Look, I can understand why the Chinese do what they do. It's hard to feed billions of people 3 meals a day. And from how the projected numbers are looking at, like, and what has happened with COVID rebounding back and hitting China, and you want to talk about information operation, the new variant that just came out, they didn't want to name it G because, China did was, effects on the WHO. But as much as you see that, and you can understand it, there's a process to go through it. Because I will tell you, you don't want the only global reset to be a war. And I think the way China is moving forward, and if Japan and the United States leadership keep supporting them, the only reset they will finally have, even under the current administration, will be a war against China. And you don't want to get there because it is not going to be a positive for the entire globe. Look, I commend the Japanese people. I mean, think about it. We dropped 2 nuclear bombs on them. We burned them into ashes. And they, within a small amount of years, less than a decade, they were able to become one of the biggest economies in the world. They became the second largest economy in the 80s. You had Japanese who were being selected to be leaders of Peru. Their manufacturing was incredible. Today, even under the current and even the previous administration that were negotiating with Iran, one of the major, diplomatic avenues that we used were the Japanese because of the relationship that they had even with the Iranian government. But I think we're at a point, you have to get the patriots in Japan to say, look, we can't allow this to keep moving forward. Guys like me who've been in combat, I will tell you, a lot of the guys like me who come out, most of my friends, we actually create non-for-profit organization, and we work on issues to try to get to what we call left of the bang. Because as much as you could push this before the combat starts, you're in a much better position. Trust me, from a guy who's been on the ground and had to kill the enemy before he killed them, you don't want to get there. And unfortunately, I think sometimes our systems do not understand that, and most of our politicians who haven't served a day in the military may not understand it. Look, Jason, Moy, I want to be able to give you the last word for both of you because we're running short on time. Otherwise, we would have days to speak. I go back to the previous question I had asked. What are some of the small fixes we could do, or what do you think needs to happen within the next couple of years just to get us to where maybe we can see a turn against what China is doing in the region?
Well, I'll go first, and I'll give Moy the last word overall. I think one of the best things people can do is watch this show and pay attention to what Moy and Jason Ho are saying. Japan is a good country, and there are good people here. And there are people that we can work with. And Ghana Hassan is another one, another patriot in Japan that we can work with. There are a lot of folks in Japan who love this country and they want to do what's best for this country. Unfortunately, not many of them are in the Diet building or in the government buildings. So as Americans, what we can do is do our homework, pay attention, read between the lines, don't pay attention to fake news. For example, there was something just recently, 5 politicians went to Taiwan from the United States, and there was a phone call from the Chinese embassy saying, don't go. but they went anyway, and the press reported it as though this was real, but it was all just a political performance. It was all set up to go see Tsai Ing-wen as a political kabuki theater. So I think what Americans need to do is turn off the fake news and listen to real voices from inside Japan. That's Moet Fukada, and read Japan Forward, listen to Sargis. Turn off fake news. That's my last word.
Thank you, Jason. Moore, you got the final word.
Yeah, my last word is Taiwan. Taiwan will be the next Afghanistan, because U.S. trying to help Afghanistan, and U.S. put lots of money to Afghanistan. They trained military for Afghanistan. They send lots of weapons, but all of money and all of weapons went to Taliban side, because both Taliban people, Afghanistan people, they are the same race. Same race people doesn't really fight each other. They help each other. That's natural things. Most of Taiwanese, they are originally from mainland China. So even we are trying to help them, they are believe in Chinese because they are actually Chinese. They are showing they are fighting against China, but that's the show. Actually, whatever we give to Taiwan, whatever U.S. provide the technology to Taiwan, they are all went to China, becoming a Chinese weapon and coming back to us. So that's what we need to pay attention to. Thank you.
Well, look, we knew, thank you very much, guys, but we knew that when the Chinese initially were using Taiwan was really to secure their money there, in this case, the Chinese leadership. And, sometimes you create things that you can't get away from 40, 50 years later. But hopefully we turn the corner on this one. Guys, thank you very much for being on the show. And again, like I say, I know as much as they're squeezing you more from the government of Japan, they're also giving you an opportunity to speak, which is and travel, which is their indirect way of saying thank you, keep up doing what you're doing to help the nation. We will have you guys back again. And with that said, God bless you guys. And this is New Paradigms.
Thank you.
Thank you.